Hi, we're Auction Conservation, and this is the Shoe Room Sessions. Richard, we should probably tell people who you are and what you do.
Yes, well, Richard Pears, currently the founder of a one-man band called Responsible Risk, and I sort of do a bit of a portfolio career, which is contributing editor at Finextra for sustainable finance, run a conference called sustainablefinance.live, and do a bit of coaching of startups. So yeah, that's kind of where I am and who I am at the moment.
And you have a fascinating career history. Can you take us through some of that contents page? Start at the beginning, where you grew up, and bring us through. And don't give us the quick one because it's interesting. And people love the details. So yeah, take us through.
Yeah, I mean, I will skip around a bit because otherwise we'll be here all day. But initially, should we say, just at kind of school, etc., I thought I was going to be an actor. So I don't know how I've kind of ended up here, but showing off was what was of interest to me. And
so Ellie's celebrating off camera like, yes, that's what we should be doing.
That's what it was all about.
Yeah.
And then my parents, my dad was a police officer at Scotland Yard, mother was a nurse, and they followed the career path of retiring to run a pub. So I got dragged with them as the youngest of the children, still in the house, and kicking and screaming because I did, this broke all of my plans to be an actor, to go to some little village in the middle of nowhere. And they got confused at that stage for a bit, so we just didn't go to university, went to work selling advertising space because I saw a little ad that said, do you want an exciting career in the world of publishing? And I thought, oh, that sounds grand. Selling advertising space, not very grand. But anyway, a hop and a skip, I ended up working for a computer magazine, and this is very early 80s. And I was sort of waltzing through an exhibition one day, and this guy, after a conversation, said, do you want to come and work for us as a sales manager in a computer company? And I was like, well, I'm not even sure what a computer company is. The only PC that I knew was my dad's, so he was a policeman. So I started working for these guys.
What was so to help people sort of position that, what was the computer of the time then?
Mini computers. So it was coming off of mainframes into minis. I mean, any sort of PC was the hobbyist sort of Spectrum type stuff, but there was nobody using them, in any way at work at any scale. So it was mini computers, and it was financial services software running on these big mini computers to sort of do trading, basically. And I didn't have a clue what was going on. They just said come along because of, personality, not any skills or background, and you'll learn as you go along. And I didn't know what was going on, and I used to go into the office and help the secretaries do the photocopying because I thought I'd better do something for this salary. Anyway, I only stayed there for under a year, and we agreed I should move on. But I kind of understood where I wanted to go. I thought, no, okay, I need to rewind, go back to something a little bit more accessible, learn about this computer industry, software industry, and do this in a way, that it wasn't quite rush me to the top, too soon.
Did the sector, and was the world of what we would now call tech, did it have aspirations to the scale and the impact we had? Was that even talked about? Was it within people's zeitgeist that it might be this all-consuming?
Not that I was aware of, and I really don't think it was, because we're still ahead of really Microsoft emerging, and all of that kind of popular language, which we'll sort of come to. So it was, still in the era when people were thinking there'd only be a limited number of computers, mainframes, running big government departments. We'd moved on from that. It was going to be the big banks or whatever, and meteorological offices, etc. But it was not something, that we'd all be using in the way that we are today by any stretch of the imagination. However, we were just at the inflection point, and so my next job was when Apple basically, arrived. So I'm blurring time a bit here, but it's so Apple came out with the Apple Mac and said we'll do desktop publishing and we'll make this available and accessible and simple, and that really was. So I went, okay, that I'll go down to the Lego building blocks versus this complex stuff. And I literally was with a small team, on the side of a large old traditional company, and we would go to the sort of printers in the East End, who were doing Letraset and cold metal and all this sort of stuff, hot metal, and we'd go in with all this whizzy shiny kit, and we'd say, this is what you need. It's half the price, just as good quality, and you'll be able to do all this sort of stuff. And it was, if there's a constant that will come through this, I've always been selling the sort of future and change to people that don't really want to change, and that was really where I could see how it could all be done, understood it, sales, marketing, go to markets, all the rest of it. And as I said to you on the way in, that was where I met a friend of mine, Julian Wilson. Julian was probably the first guy we used to chat about the environment with whilst we were trying to, drink beers and sell Apple Macs. He sadly passed away yesterday, which is why I wanted to pay a tribute to him today. But we had a great time. We learnt a lot. It was, the fun 80s. And then from that,
were the 80s as they're sort of documented and recalled? So when I think about that, and so I was born 83, right? So sadly I missed the music and the yuppie era and the partying hard and the excess of everything. Is that what it felt like in the time?
Yeah.
Damn it.
Yeah. And it was good. And it was also, I think we were on a sort of an edge of something that we could see it wasn't good as well. So we kind of enjoyed all of that, but I definitely, there was what do they call them? The sort of the yuppies, I suppose. Very loud, very abrasive, very sort of selfish, and
greed is good.
And greed is good kind of thing. And we were out there selling. I mean, we were sales guys, and we would drink and party and all the rest of it. But there was an excess which was, you could see, was not quite right. And sort of my family values was always kind of, that make do and mend phrase, post World War and all this sort of stuff. So the fact I found this guy that I was having this hippie conversation with about whilst we were doing that, we had this sort of weird
and that kind was nowhere else outside of you and Julian. That was not discussed, right? People weren't talking about the environment and sustainability. I don't even think John Elkington had come up with the word yet by that point.
No, definitely not. I mean, and it was he's interesting. He's got something that I have an intrinsic set of values about, but I don't quite know how to articulate it. And he'd got it a bit earlier, but he was that classic confusion of, he called himself a failed billionaire. He constantly was trying to make money. He was buying estates in Scotland, a place called Loch Dhu, 30 years ago. He made money, he lost money, he made money, he lost money. But he was this confusion between a yuppie and a hippie. That was kind of what the time was like for me.
The other interesting cultural difference, so in the sort of, my memory sort of kicks in late 80s, early 90s, you describing someone that was different and interesting there. That wasn't how difference was treated in the 80s. Difference was, certainly in the north of England where I'm from, difference was attacked and abused and bullied. It wasn't celebrated like it is now.
Yeah.
You meet someone genuinely different with a different outlook, approach, appearance. It's like, wow, that person's fascinating.
Yeah.
That wasn't the way it used to be.
No, well, he was from Scarborough, so he was.
That's not far away from where I'm from.
Yeah. No, he sort of kicked and fought and punched his way. I mean, he was a character in the total sense of the word. But anyway, it wasn't recognised. It wasn't, and I suppose I was lucky because I was sort of white, middle class, looks like you kind of BBC TV presenter kind of whatever world that was then. So I got the lucky breaks, and as I went on, I literally saw the waves of recruitment, which kind of went really, okay, we're in the tech industry, so we need Asian men who were skilled and qualified. Then it was basically marketing will allow women in. It was almost like this. And then it was obviously as we moved through to sort of plurality that we have today. But I could sort of see the waves coming through, which was
just before we leave this element of the contents page. You mentioned the word look there. How do you think about the role look plays in both your career and just life in general?
Well, I think it's enormous. It's enormous. Luck is enormous, but I do think you can create luck if you have some opportunities that you, even very light ones, that you can exploit. So as you can tell, my mother used to say, well, you got the gift of the gab, so you'll be all right. So I was always happy to talk. So all of these, that job, that first one in the I walked through an exhibition, I talked to a guy,
Character,
I
charisma.
engaged him, and then I got a lucky break. So there's some characteristics that you can have that can create a lucky break. And that doesn't have to be personality and being an extrovert, but whatever you have, I think if you exploit it, then kind of luck can happen for you. And I think skipping right forward, Satya Nadella, when he came in as CEO of Microsoft, he talked about growth mindset, which is a book by Carol Dweck. And essentially what he was trying to say was, Microsoft, you've got a fixed mindset. You're successful. You are the masters of the universe, and that is the definition of you. But actually, we don't know anything yet, and we haven't embraced anybody, and we haven't done anything yet. So we have to grow, and that switch from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset is something that's taught in schools now. I put my hand up, I get, oh, you're good, Richard, at something. I put my hand up, Richard, no, you're no good at that. I shut myself down and think I'm no good at that forever and ever, amen, after that. So growth mindset, all of this kind of stuff, I think whatever you have, you can create luck from having a growth mindset.
I completely agree, word for word. I think so many people underestimate the role of luck because they hear the word and think that takes away the importance of effort or hard work. And I like the concept that the harder you work, the luckier you get. It's opportunities for luck to stick. You increase the surface area.
Yeah.
I've just read a book called Thinking in Bets by a professional female poker player who left a psychology PhD to go play poker on the world stage. I want to say Annie Dukes or something. And her thing is we massively underestimate the percentage of luck in every decision we make.
Yeah.
Amazing person. And it's given me a really more comfortable view of, and we'll come on to risk management and things like that. We can make a fantastic decision and the outcome can still be bad.
Yeah.
But the decision was made at the right time with the best information in mind. It doesn't mean it's connected to the outcome or the result.
Which
I think is fascinating.
Yeah. No,
so take us back to the glorious 80s and keep
the
going
glorious 80s. Well, so that job, in terms of, Apple and so forth, that was only working for sort of a dealer, if you like, a value-added reseller, as they used to call them. I wanted to get back to a sort of a primary producer of software. And another good decision that I made was everybody was into hardware at the time. It was all now the explosion of Macs and the Apricot. You probably don't remember that one. That was going to be the British version of the Apple Mac. And
never even heard of it.
Well, I'll tell you a funny story there. So I think when I was wind back a bit further, when I was selling advertising space, I went to Apricot to sell them some advertising space, and I was so convinced that I actually bought shares in the company. He didn't buy any advertising space, but I bought shares in the company. Anyway, they tanked completely. But he ended up running Microsoft Europe. Many years later, I met him, a guy called John Leftwich. And I told him this story, and he sort of went, well, sorry about that kind of thing, but it got you on the right path. You're here with me at Microsoft. Anyway, so I went, okay, go back to, let's do software. And at the time,
why did you go software is the way to go? Was it because everyone else was going hardware and you liked going in the prevailing direction?
I think because I could see that hardware was is a margin business, which is a slim margin business. And and you've got supply chain constraints because of the physical production that's going on, distribution challenges, and you've got margin constraints. So as a sales guy, what you want is an endless tap of what it is you're selling at a very high margin. And then basically, you can deliver it without any constraints, and you can have obviously high margins.
Are carbon credits the equivalent of hardware? Because they're constrained by physical limitations on the land. It's a one-off sale of a product.
They probably should be. I think, unfortunately, there's probably a lot of what we used to call grey imports in the hardware business, which was people faking and duplicating, and so that's maybe the parallel. So it's an interesting parallel. Yeah. Anyway, so I thought I'd go to software, and it was quite funny because I went to a company called Computer Associates (CA). And they were the largest independent software company in the world. Probably people now won't have heard of them because they've subsequently got bought by other companies. But I went to the interview, and this guy got out a terminal. It was to sell mainframes software. So I was going back to that. I was thinking I was going back to the big boys, having done the Apple Mac, and they produced sort of graphs for the financial institute, etc. Financial institutions. So this guy sort of went, oh look, we've got a pie chart here, and it looked really terrible on one of those sort of VT100 kind of green screen type things versus an Apple Mac. I was like, okay. And he said, we're going to show how you explode a pie out. And it was like 40 lines of code later, he exploded the pie out of it. And I was going, and why is this good? And he said, well, because we can do this at batch over. Anyway, I had no idea, basically. My naivety of how bad it was okay, fine. But big company, looked very, successful, global. I just went, okay, I'll take the job. And I spent... and it was rubbish, by the way, but I spent 6 years there, diverted out of that area, went straight into the sort of PC software, which they were just growing.
What's the best thing you learned in that 6 years? Because that's two. I tend to think about career arcs, and I think this follows from academia and things, in 3-year chunks. So you had 2 like mini chapters there of 6 years. What was the best thing you learned in that time?
At CA, that was really just sort of the hard bitten sort of learnings of how software was produced, distributed, marketed, sold, learning about the change, again, as I said earlier on, the resistance to change. You would have to sell them why a spreadsheet was a good idea. Does that sort of make sense? So you would go to people who literally had a physical piece of paper, which was a spreadsheet. That's where it derived from. And they would have all of the calculations through it, and then they would rub out a line or a row, and then they would recalculate it through. And you would say, I can do this for you with a digital thing. And they would go, why would I want to do that? I've already got my spreadsheet here. And I go, because one touch, but then I've got to, so this is kind of, it was the very raw lessons of it. And we used to literally go over to San Jose, and I sometimes think I invented this because we all think this, but I said, why don't we have in a spreadsheet a way of like auto-correcting like we have in a spell checker for in our word processor? And they went, oh, that's a good idea. And then it appeared, right? So now, did I invent it? Were 1,000 other people asking for it? I don't know.
No one else is saying they did, so claim it.
I don't know. Yeah. But that's how raw it was. A sales guy.
Did it feel creative and innovative and special at that time? Did you think you were building something new?
Yeah, no, it did. And we were sort of like I think in hindsight, we were the sort of grubby second-hand salesman of software, because it was typically a company that acquired lots of companies, integrated them badly, put a little sort of lick of paint over them, and sort of said, hey, you've got a 10-year deal on these already, because you bought out some. Why don't we give you a 15-year spread the credit kind of thing? It was it was creative. But we were,
not all art's beautiful, is it?
Wasn't all art beautiful? And CA was a funny old company. The leadership, a lot of them ended up in prison because they were not doing their accounting properly, and inflating the earnings.
There's an underlying, but that's how a market and a system and a way of working develops. One of my frustrations about the environmental sector at the minute, which we've got an amazing guest that we're also recording later on today who wants to argue that the environment sector doesn't even exist as a concept, which I love the idea of. Mm-hmm. It's like it should be everything. we look at natural capital and we say, well, hold on a second, there's some bad actors and not everything's perfect and some things fail, therefore it's terrible. What other industry has ever done things perfectly? You are describing the tech world, the foundations of that, which is the biggest industry in the world, wherever you draw the bubble around it. It's not even one industry anymore, right?
Yeah.
But there were problems and bad operators. And I always talk about the search engines. Google was the 21st search engine. People assume it was the first. They nailed it first time and it was perfect. Of course they didn't. Yeah. They try and hold new things to a standard of something that no one else has ever met. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. No, I mean, it is crazy. And, people just forget there was, half a dozen word processors kind of thing, and none of them spoke to each other at all. You couldn't share anything between any of them, really.
Like your pie chart, the things that took 40 lines of code, now you inadvertently can't not do that.
Yeah. I mean, it was all bonkers, and yeah, there were bad actors, and people like CA did a lot of good things, but yeah, ultimately they just got too greedy and just tried to grow too far and so forth.
But
But
that's a story as old as time, right?
yeah, it's the oldest time. It's just
Yeah.
it's the what does a market do? It kind of a breakthrough comes through. It's sometimes it's very, very high quality, either at its academic or its first inception commercially. But then everybody tries to duplicate it
Yeah.
as quickly as possible, and it's commoditize it, which is what they were doing. They were either buying or building cheaply, packaging, and trying to keep to the same price as the highest quality. And that then basically sort of, if you like, damaged the market quality a little bit. But it went through a couple of iterations, and then you ended up with, the likes of the Microsofts, etc., who kept the balance between quality and so forth, for a very long time, and obviously had competitors when they wavered, and market interventions when they wavered.
So after the 6 years at CA?
Well, I thought very stupidly. So Microsoft had emerged now, certainly in the UK had emerged and was obviously the sort of becoming a primary competitor. Lotus was really the big competitor.
I haven't heard that in
Yeah,
years.
there you go. So Lotus was the big shiny beacon on the hill.
I was a customer.
Yeah,
I had the
yeah,
suite of word processing
yeah,
type
yeah,
stuff
yeah.
and
So it
everything.
was really kind of, there was Microsoft with SuperCalc, which was the spreadsheet, and then there was Lotus 123, and we were moving from
Yes.
DOS to Windows and all the rest of it. So Lotus was really the place to go. But I was too passionate about my company and product that I thought I can't go to the enemy. So I went, I'm going to go and do something different. So I went to a startup, which was in the UK, and I thought this is going to be my startup. It had only been going for a little while, and it was selling virtual reality software. And this was, I don't know when the heck this was now, 1990 or something, on a PC with a headset, with, haptic, devices, all this kind of stuff. And I did that for 2 years, trying to, sell again something completely new. And we were the most entertaining thing in town. Everybody wanted us to come and talk at their conferences and so forth. And we thought, wow, we're going to do really well, but we were just the entertainment, really, and nobody had any intentions of buying this stuff because it made you sick when you put a helmet on.
It's so fascinating, isn't it? That so literally I was in a conversation yesterday about the Apple Vision Pro setup.
Yeah.
And it kind of feels like we're a couple more iterations from that landing. Some version of that will. At some point there will be.
I'm getting very skeptical now, having given my long history of it. And Microsoft did HoloLens as well. I thought HoloLens was a really good thing, and they've wound that down. But mind you, Microsoft invests and lets down and pulls out, and then Apple steps in and commercializes. It's happened before.
You might have to correct me on this story if it's not right, but I remember hearing an anecdote that the iPad was actually developed and they kind of like soft brought it forward years before the iPhone. No one wanted it. Tablet didn't grab. That went and sat on the shelf, and suddenly an iPhone appears, is rolled out, and then it's like, oh, by the way, we can bring you this. So maybe there's an interim step that's needed.
There's a famous project at Microsoft, which I forget the name of. It was Korea or something, and it was I think Pete, and I might get lost on this, but it was the iPad idea, and they had all of the sort of all the constructs, etc. But it never went to product, and that was a long time before.
Important.
Timing is essential. Yeah, timing is essential. Yeah, and I mean, sort of leaping back. So virtual reality in the 90s, but it was really interesting in one way. I remember BT Martlesham Heath, which was their research labs. They were doing a project with the city for financial institutions, and it was, how can we use this stuff? So instead of a trader with all them thousands of screens, it was, how do you actually put a headset on and they can see all of the sort of indices that are being displayed and make a decision much more quickly and trade much more rapidly. And they had it represented. We're sitting here in the background, people won't hear it, but there's a field, the birds are tweeting, the sun is shining, the leaves are green, we're relaxed, and there's no sort of thunderstorm or lightning or whatever. So they used all of those human dimensions, which mean that we're relaxed and just thinking about this conversation and not worrying about anything around us. But they brought all of those things into the VR, so that the minute the birds stopped tweeting, or we heard a truck go behind us or something, we inherently would look to the point on the screen in the VR that would give us a signal that a market was dropping or something. So they used all the human innate kind of senses to represent stock trading.
So what year would that
Amazing.
have been?
90, very early 90s, I forget precisely.
In the US right now, if do you know anything about American football at all? If I talk about
No.
Fine. Okay. Highest paid players are the quarterbacks, $50 million a year. They're very rare. There's 15 good ones on the planet. So you are a unicorn if you can do this. The problem is, every time you throw a ball, you damage your shoulder a tiny bit. Every time a big 20-stone tackles you to the ground, you get a risk of injury or damage. So what they're trying to do is give these players as much experience and reps of behaving as they can without the physical impact. The Washington Redskins, or Washington Commanders as they're called now, as a team over there, they have developed the best VR simulator for their young quarterback to allow the person to read the field and see everything around them and exactly as you describe without the physical abuse. So they've got this person playing like a 5-year veteran in year 1 because he's had the number of reps of a 5-year veteran, but not the physical toll on the body. So literally something that was 30 years ago is now delivering a level of performance. Now, what's great about that is they're working in a salary capped environment. So every league can only pay 200 and something million across their resource base. So they're finding opportunities they can spend as much as they want on tech, so they can improve things in that aspect and get the performance out of a player that way outweighs what they could spend on another player. So it's fascinating how the timing and how it develops. It might not be right then, but it's massively having an impact now.
And it's timing, and when we come on, we can reference back to this perhaps, but where we are with natural capital, but it is timing. It is inflection points.
I love that word.
I mean,
it's just so important. I've just finished reading Pattern Breakers. Have you come across that?
No.
It talks about any decent startup needs to identify a significant inflection point and needs to literally live in the future today. People will think you're mad and think you're crazy. And totally selling the future and change has to be the title of your podcast. This is exactly what it is.
Well, when I was running marketing at Microsoft, I used to say, well, that sounds very grand, a piece of marketing in Microsoft UK. But I say it's patterns and magic, right? Most of what we do is just patterns. It's just repeat. But occasionally there's a bit of magic that we do.
What does magic mean?
And magic just means you see the gap. You go for the, if you take it back to sport, the patterns create the gap, and then it's about spotting the gap and going for it. That's the inflection point.
I'm obsessive about the things that change a sport or the world a decade in a day. So there's various sporting achievements. Usain Bolt, where he ran that 100 meters, he turned around, looked at his competitors and still broke the world record. It was such a generational leap. It just changed in a moment. There's an American analogy. There's a gentleman called Vince Carter who was a basketball player. And when they used to slam dunk the Michael Jordans, they'd run up, jump and put the ball in the hoop. There's a slam dunk competition that's supposed to go 10 rounds. This guy called Vince Carter runs up, does a 360 in midair, puts the ball through his legs and dunks it. They just stop the competition after 3 rounds. They're like, that is a change that no one's ever seen before. And you get those things in sport that are so transcendent. Shane Warne rocks up in the 1990s and bowls a ball to Mike Gatting that defies the laws of physics. And all of a sudden it opens people's minds up to the art of the possible.
Exactly.
I adore those moments.
So, no, I think it's essential. And if you look at rugby, we're just about to go to the British Lions, and we've got Finn Russell at fly half. Finn Russell is one of those people that would not allow to be Finn Russell, 10 years ago, 5 years ago even, let alone when I was playing. And my very low level of village rugby, I liked to run around in circles and under people's legs like Marcus Smith, but everybody, all the forwards would beat me up because I've just got to kick the ball up in the air.
I mean, so right now, the IPL cricket-wise is the biggest explosion of a sporting league in the world that's ever happened. They've gone from an idea to bigger than the NFL in 20 years, right? When I first played cricket, if you bowled left-handed, they tried to make you bowl right-handed. They were like, oh, no, that's not, you need to do this in the normal way. Now, it's those people who have a point of differentiation that are celebrated and like...
No, and it's absolutely crucial, in this world that we're going through now. And, it's kind of what brings me all the way through what we're talking about. So I've sort of got to VR, and I'm kind of saying it's not happening. It's just not happening. We're wearing something the size of a fridge on our head. It's making us feel nauseated. It's just crazy, and it's not okay. It's a wrong time, a wrong place kind of thing. So I went, okay, I better go back to where I was, and so I joined Microsoft. So it was kind of, if I joined those 2 years earlier, that was a point of wealth creation beyond measure. I'm not complaining, but there was a 2-point delta, 2-year delta on that. But anyway, joined Microsoft, and I did.
Did they have a big presence in the UK at this point?
Yeah, they'd got well, it wasn't a big presence actually. They were at a place called Winner's Triangle, which is in Reading, just on the A329, and it's a little triangular building. I think it might have even been knocked down now. But it felt like a big presence. It was a glamorous office, it was a nice piece of architecture. And they'd just moved up only in the previous 5 years from a industrial mill in Caversham, in Reading. So this was the UK office kind of thing. Interesting, on that journey, they moved to a campus just down the road, 5 buildings, it took you, it was about a mile long to get from one meeting to the other. And they've just reduced it now post-COVID to 1 building because nobody goes into the office anymore. So I mean that's a whole arc in itself. But yeah, so when I went to Microsoft, I felt like I'd come home, because really, really lovely people, very, very bright. I mean, I just felt totally out of my depth. I'd sort of crawled my way through the gutter of software, and a lot of these people had landed from Cambridge.
Is that how you felt at the time, or just in hindsight?
No, at the time I did feel classic imposter syndrome kind of thing. I mean, I didn't dwell on it. I didn't have anxiety or anything. I was, too full of myself for that. But I did think, flipping hell, every meeting we were in, and people would go, "Oh, hello, we're in a meeting. Can you tell us something about yourself?" And someone would say, "Oh, yeah, okay, well, I was a double first at Cambridge, and then I was got a blue, and at the weekend I'm a horse whisperer." You kind of go, "How the hell am I supposed to follow that?" I play rugby for the village team, and I got a CSE in biology or something. I mean, it just felt out of my depth. But what you quickly realised was that some of them, a lot of them, were just brilliant all round, but actually were very academic and didn't really know how to do what I knew how to do, which was to deal with all the distribution and the people that they would have to engage with. But anyway, did feel like I was coming home. Loved them, great people, still friends with just an enormous amount of that generation, and they stretched me. They took me on a journey of understanding and exposure to things that I couldn't possibly imagine. And I always put myself, I suppose I felt my strength was presenting and talking and telling stories, which we might come to. And so I that was what I was good at. I got put into those situations.
So was it purely experiential learning then? You were just in different situations that were causing you to learn your feet?
Yeah, really. And actually, my hiring boss, so I went in as, so I'd been a kind of sales guy, sales manager or whatever in the other companies. And we went in as evangelists. What's an evangelist? I mean, it was a thing at the time.
Elle tells everyone we're a cult, so it would fit with that.
Yeah. I'm not sure we want to be associated with cults, but there we go.
I've asked similar, but she's fine with it.
Yeah, no, it was the thing. It was the art of the evangelist. It was a whole thing. I forget who the guy was that was the great exponent of it. But my boss at the time, were Terry Smith and Gordon Smiley, fantastic characters, brilliant senior people at Microsoft by the time they'd finished. But I use the phrase in what I do now is storytelling, matchmaking, and coaching, and that was a Gordon Smileyism. And you would get people that go to him and say, "Can I do an MBA? I need to leave, for a year, go and do an MBA." He said, "Well, why do you want to do that?" And he said, "Well, because I want to, study the best companies in the world, understand how they operate. I want to, get a really good exposure." And he'd say, "You do all that in your day job. You go out there, you tell stories of what the future is from Microsoft, you matchmake partners to clients, to opportunity, and then you coach people with the greatest technical people in the world how to deliver that. And you will learn more from that, because everything in the academic world is printed into a book from 10 years ago. You're writing the book here." And it was so true. It was so true. It wasn't until probably 3 or 4 years after I'd left Microsoft that I realized how we were so far ahead of imagining what the future could be, because we were getting it into our brains 3 or 4 years.
Literally, so we travelled back from Scotland overnight. I wrote a piece travelling back about how I feel so fortunate to be working at what I feel is like the renaissance period for natural capital, because we fast forward 10 years, things will have started to standardize. We will be teaching natural capital MBAs if we're not already. Everyone will know the same thing. People will be developed in the same way, they'll have the same skill set, and it'll just be rinse and repeat. Whereas now, people are coming from marketing backgrounds and financial backgrounds and ecological backgrounds and land ownership backgrounds and every different aspect. You look at us and Nattergal and Restore and Rebalance Earth, led by people from very different directions, so doing things in unique and different ways.
Exactly, yeah. Same thing.
Hotbed of innovation.
Same thing. Yeah. It's the patterns, of where they all came from, but the magic is now this new intersection that's happening, that's creating this breakthrough. But then it'll get commoditized and become sort of a bit dull until you get another breakthrough. I mean, you can look at any of these things.
Literally that. Verbatim that. Yes.
Yeah. Exactly. It's like music, anything. It gets sterile and boring, and then you have to kind of.
I think we're at in the equivalent of the internet, we're at the dial-up age of natural capital.
Yeah.
We've broadly figured out that we can connect some stuff together, but we've no idea like what will come and the potential. And the smartphone's years away, social media's even like we're only just started.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's the sort of cliche. I use it a lot in interviews as well. But Bill Gatesism, which is, you overestimate what you can do in 2 years, and you underestimate what will happen in 10. And it's so true.
So I use something very similar. So we had John Elkington on the 101st podcast, and I adore that man. And I didn't. All my grandparents passed away pretty early, so I never knew any grandfathers. And John will hate me with the aging. Obviously, he'd be a father, not a grandfather. But I'd like to adopt John because he's just the stories that he can share. And he's 75 now, maybe even 76 now. And he slapped me around for saying, what we can achieve in 10. He's like, no, that's lazy logic. With AI, that's 2 now. And I was like, yeah, he might be right.
Yeah.
What used to take 10. Doesn't mean people will change that fast still.
Yeah.
But the systems, the process,
and that's
documentation.
The key thing. That's the key thing. And that really is the key things. Because what you can do is, certainly Microsoft went, okay, and I think the whole tech industry went, right, so we're now very clever. We know what the world will look like. We're going to sort of, now we're talking, the phrases of PC on every desktop in every home
and at that
was
point,
emerging.
Did it feel unlimited in terms of capital? So
yeah. It felt like we had this ridiculous margin. We had this ridiculous sort of we weren't dominating, which was a word we were told never to use. We weren't dominating, but we were getting there. And you knew you had the better product. You knew they had a better marketing and management and everything else. I'd worked in these other ones. I knew what I was kind of competing against. And
that new and that feel still important to what we do. So we went shopping for some new land in Scotland earlier this week. The first thing that is a feeling. So you go see a new piece of land and estate, and it feels like something we could work with. Then you engage the analytical part of your brain. Okay, let's find the reasons why it wouldn't, the challenges, the difficulties, and things like that. But that knowing and feeling is still a big part of it.
Oh yeah, definitely. But it's the same thing, which is about the timing and the sort of the inflection, because Finn Russell, whatever, of 20 years ago might have known that he should be doing a sidestep and a loopy pass, or he wasn't allowed to.
No.
So there's knowing and allowing to, and then when you get to the factual bit of presenting the evidence, if the climate is no, because we're shutting you down because we've never done it before. As opposed to, we do need something new. There is a need for inflection.
You put the business equivalent of a Finn Russell in a public sector, they're not allowed to perform.
Yeah.
They're still not allowed to.
Yeah.
We're not here to take risks. We're not here to create new things. You're here to do as you're told.
Yeah.
So, moral of the story, play the right game in the right place. Otherwise, you're going to go nowhere.
Yeah, that's right. And, or sometimes you need slightly more constraints than you do in others. But, that's then giving people the great people are ones that give people the license to operate, even though it may be a slightly constrained environment.
We've literally just hired a new lead for the drone surveying part of what we do, so topographical surveys of the estates and things. She's been with us a few weeks now. Amazing lady who's actually just come from Apple. She was one of the geniuses at Apple, grew up in Australia, has been around the world doing various different surveying stuff. And I said to her, is anything, I always like asking people at the start of their time with us, what do you think you're getting as a company? And a few months later saying to them, how has that changed? Or so a few weeks I said, has anything surprised you yet? And she's like, I've never been trusted as much to make the choices of what I need to do a good job.
Yeah.
And my thing is, well, why hire someone better than you and then try and tell them what to do?
Yeah. But how often does that happen?
I know, but people run bad businesses, don't they?
Well, yeah, and it's I saw as Microsoft expanded and as it went on, and
and this was rapid expansion, right?
Rapid. I mean, growing like Topsy, really.
Just more people turning up, coming from nowhere.
Yeah, and that's what I said about that sort of 2-year delta. So what happened was there was kind of this relatively small group of people. So there was a meeting called WISM, the Worldwide Sales and Marketing Meeting. And when I started, you would still travel to it, and it would be in a large conference room.
Your first one, how many people?
I don't know, 300 people, 400 people, something like that. So that was the Worldwide Sales and Marketing Management team. By the end, nobody travelled, and it was it was a sort of an online call kind of thing. So they were hiring everybody.
How many people dialing in?
5,000, something like that at that level. But they were hiring IBM, they were hiring people in from CA, they were hiring as many as they could and bring your teams with you. They just couldn't fill the boots far enough. And then obviously at that point they were sort of changing the stock options, changing the benefits, all these things like, when you get to 10 years, you can take your wife to meet Bill Gates for dinner. All of that was gone because you couldn't do that for
5,000 dinners.
Bill would not be would be a bit full.
Yeah.
So it was an interesting sort of, but if you like, it's a figure of how it was growing.
When you joined, was that still a point whereby you would meet Bill and Bill would know the people?
Yeah. So I mean, some fun. Whether it's we recall this or not, but I remember one of the funny ones. It was not me meeting Bill, but it was the proximity to Bill, which a very close friend of mine dealt with. So she worked for me, and he came to London to speak at a conference, which was that weird QE2 centre, which is near the Houses of Parliament. Yeah. And it's all weird little corridors, and apparently they say that's because it was designed that if they were attacked by terrorists, they wouldn't be able to go straight through corridors and attack everybody. Can't believe that's true, but that's the apocryphal story. But anyway, Bill was on the stage, and all of the rooms were emptying at the same time because there were other meetings going on. And they said, well, we can't get him out into that sort of maelstrom of people all swarming out. You just can't do that. So he'll have to leave, because obviously if he doesn't leave, he'll get mobbed. So where can he leave to? So there was basically a door to the side of the stage, and he marched off and went through the door. But the door was a cupboard. And so he was in the cupboard with my friend, who was his, ran marketing communications in Microsoft, his bouncer, his PA, probably 2 others, and they were all basically pressed noses into armpits, just waiting for this room to clear kind of thing. So yeah, some people got very close to Bill in those days. I mean, I would fly over. I had a few meetings with Steve Ballmer, who followed him, famously, the guy that went developers, if you remember that. And he was an incredible character to meet with personally. But yeah, you did meet with the leadership team, one-on-one and, in small groups.
And he literally ended up buying the Seattle Seahawks football team.
That's right, yeah. Great character. I mean, a lot of people don't like him and what he did. I've got a longer, stories about him. But where were we? Back to it again. We were at this massive growth. We're at a consolidation point as well. So we've had loads of word processors, loads of spreadsheets. Everybody's confused. None of the standards join up. It's a messy market kind of thing. And then basically Microsoft, presents the better user interface.
At your point of arrival, were the concept of a brand guidelines and phraseology and the way Microsoft would market, was that all set in stone already, or were you forming and shaping that?
It was fairly well defined. Yeah, it wasn't as rigid as it became, but it was fairly well defined, because that was the moment of trying to say, hang on, Microsoft Office is here now. Right before it was a word processor, a spreadsheet, a PowerPoint, or whatever, a database. And they were all very separate brandings usually, and there was, and they didn't work together technically either. So Office was, the proposition was, we're going to do this, make it better, driven by Apple, inspired by Apple's kind of approach, and therefore branding was very important to that. And Microsoft Office was an answer to an issue of, I've sent you this on this format and that doesn't work in that format, and I don't know what you're using because I'm using this, and it was Office. So it got there through branding, through cohesion, through consolidation to a certain extent.
Did the sector feel combative? So like you said, there was sort of the reference to what Apple were doing. Were Apple viewed as a competitor? Was there a us and them, or was it we're all trying to build an ecosystem?
No,
of
it was
tech?
very us and them. It
Yeah,
was definitely very adversarial. Yeah. So the sort of at CA, the salesmen there, who were earning sort of £1 million a year or something back in those days, they were moving now into this world and bringing all those techniques with them, kind of thing. Yeah, there was a lot of sharp elbows. So yeah, there's no doubt
I
about
don't.
that.
I mean, maybe I'm naive to this, but I think it's wonderful that we don't see that in natural capital right now. Like, genuinely, I could pick up the phone and we'll get approached by people, and we're very fortunate. We're not in a position of needing to raise capital, but we'll get a call and someone will want us to manage some land for them or invest with us. And I'll say, I'm really sorry we can't do that, but have you spoken to Nattergal? Have you spoken to
Yeah.
Rebalance Earth? I love that we get to do that.
Yeah. No, I totally see that. It's these software companies were largely driven by the American culture, the
Yeah.
American growth culture, backed by sort of PE or whatever it might be, and so it was grow, and it was exponential growth they wanted.
Think
So
we'll see a chapter of that in the natural capital world?
it happens in absolutely everything. I mean, I think that I've sort of reflected a little bit. One of the worst stories I remember about capitalism was there was a book. What was it called now? I can't remember, but it was about the food industry.
Barbarians at the Gate.
No, the story. The story was basically this. It's the story that matters. They said, right, we've got however many people in America. We sell this amount of burgers, this amount of Coke, this amount of chips, and therefore we can see what the size of the market is because you only have 3 meals a day. And even if we get 100% market share, that's as much as it's going to be. So what else can we do? Oh, I know. We need to change the size of the basket. You think about a basket of goods. Well, the basket is your stomach. So they actually went, how do we expand the stomach so that we actually get more product in? But obviously we've got to reduce the quality of the product. We've got to commoditize it because we will make an increased margin. And that was that when they introduced, corn syrup and cornstarch, etc., because it was cheaper. Then they changed the sizes. If you see a fries and Coke from the 70s through to now,
or in the US now versus here.
Yeah. So that with no consideration for human health was how we commoditize by lowering the quality, appearing to be as good as the highest quality, and trying to make, and that happens every single time. And even I said to my kids the other day when we were doing computing and the internet, etc., we honestly thought we were going to make the world a better place. Right, standing where we are now doesn't seem like we succeeded, right?
Oh, I don't know. I think you did. I mean, think about how many people's lives have been saved as a result.
Well, I've been a bit glib there. We looked at it and we thought, if people are able to communicate and understand each other and talk and share stories, then the world will be a better place.
I think the world's a much kinder place now. So, UK, my parameters I'm going to talk about right now, is a much kinder world than the one I lived in as a teenager or a kid. And I think the ability that you're not constrained to your information, your group of people being those that you're geographically proximate to, I think we've got a far more inclusive, understanding, kind society than we had in the 80s and 90s. It's not perfect by any stretch.
I'm sort of feeling a bit more jaded about it, perhaps.
If you were slightly charismatic or flamboyant at my school, you were physically assaulted for being gay.
Yeah.
Whereas now that would be totally fine. No one would bat an eye.
Yeah.
I remember the first, and this is just focusing on one lens of difference, but I remember the first gay kiss on TV being a front page news story.
Yeah.
Now no one would bat an eyelid.
No.
And that's a better world as a result.
Yeah. No, of course. And Brad Smith, who's people don't know that name much, but he's the president of Microsoft, and he's been there for all 3 CEOs.
Oh wow!
And he basically runs he's a lawyer, and he's run all of the sort of advocacy and procedural side of the business. But he wrote a book called Weapons and Tools, and basically all of these things, of course, are both. They are tools for the advancement of society, but they are weapons to be used against society, and that will ever be thus. And he tells extraordinary. He is an extraordinary guy to listen to. He talks about how people like Microsoft helped signal that the war was going to happen between Russia and Ukraine, and not at the political sort of rhetorical level, but they were literally monitoring the use of devices and technology and so forth, and they got a huge, as you can imagine, operational command center, which shows bots and drones and malware, etc., being dropped into certain places like the energy industry, and they could see basically, his metaphor was like radar, seeing the Luftwaffe coming over. They could see the advanced, kind of raids coming, and they got in touch and they helped lift a lot of the command centers up into the cloud, so it was away from being attacked. So extraordinary. They have extraordinary vision and foresight because they've got data in everything, and they can interpret it and see what's coming next.
Cool. Take us back to, so we've just joined Microsoft. We're in the sort of the years things are exploding and growing. We're in the global meeting with 300 or 400 people, but it's getting bigger.
Yeah, it's getting bigger. And the nice thing about it was that you could move around departments very easily. So back to sort of patterns and magic as well. A lot of things, if you were in a career, if you were a sales guy, you were a sales guy. You couldn't go into marketing, unless you'd gone off and done the MBA and done the degree. But there they were, no, we actually need a bit more sales savvy in marketing, so go over to marketing, or whatever. You could move around. I mean, you could obviously become a software engineer if you wanted to, but that you clearly needed to know what you need to be doing. So I moved around all these different bits, and my eldest son had been very ill when he was born, just for a short period of time, thankfully. But it kind of made me went, I'm not going to do the international thing. My wife gave up a job, and we stuck home, family, all those kind of values were most important.
And so that was the UK for
that was UK. Period. I stayed in UK Microsoft for 23 years. I worked in different divisions, international and so forth, but I was in the UK.
Did you feel as if you were consciously sacrificing anything career-wise at the time?
Well, I did say to my sons the other day, 28 and 26, I said, guys, you realise that I sacrificed, this for you so that I could be with you and help you. And they said, well, thanks, Dad, but you shouldn't have bothered. No, I still didn't feel that I was ever going to really make it. And if I sort of exposed myself much further than the levels I was at, I was going to get sort of found out and sent back, So I just thought, I'm onto a good thing here. I'm looking after the the family, doing better than I ever thought I would, loving it, stretching myself every single day, moving from evangelism to marketing to professional services to alliances, all these things, management. And so I was, and I still did value getting back and seeing the family, whereas a lot of people were living in a plane and, burning out careers and relationships. So I kind of felt I had it kind of right, but there was some,
If you look at the level above you, lots of divorces.
Yeah, I think the whole board, literally the whole board.
We had it was early in OC. We were maybe 18 months old, and maybe even less. And I got a call from, they must orchestrate them doing this, but a number of the big four consultancies saying, can we come and speak to you? Can we have a coffee with you? And one of them was like, we've been told to go find the company in the sort of environmental space who's going to be a unicorn, going to be worth $1 billion. We have the capital in place to back you to the hill and take you to an IPO. We want it to be an iconic business. And I agreed to go see these people for a coffee. I had no idea what was coming. There was probably like 9 or 10 of us in the business at this point, so it was really early. And they were like, right, so we'll do whatever we can. And they were really laying on, we'll introduce you to whoever you like. We want you to sign with us and do this. And we're like, and I was like, okay, can you introduce me to anyone who's scaled a business from an idea to $1 billion that isn't divorced? And they went, nope.
Wow.
No. And it's funny, I went home and sat with my wife and had a conversation. I was like, right, my limit, so I will work 24/7. If I fall over at work and that's the end of me, fine. I love what I do. It's awesome. The thing I will not sacrifice is my marriage and relationship with kids. And there's a barrier to everyone, right? Because you have to make compromises in everything you do. That's my limit that I won't. I got really lucky with my wife. I'm not getting that lucky again.
Definitely, that's a whole topic of sort of burnout, and there were people that really geeky guys who probably had never had a girlfriend in their life, and suddenly women throwing them at them because they were zillionaires. So all these weird dynamics of
the business offer. Did they help in terms of that? Were there people around that could help people understand the differences in their lives. We'd have like heads of people or culture now that might be able to, or psychologists that would help. And like our head of people is an amazing psychologist, PhD by background.
Yeah.
So in terms of coaching those type of things, but I guess it probably wasn't there yet.
Geez. I mean,
Just too fast.
I don't think they did. Maybe they did for the sort of the top exec team, but it was quite a funny story. The doctor, because on the campus at Microsoft in Reading, they actually had a doctor who would come in and they had a massage area. They had retail units. They didn't want you to leave, right?
Yeah, so it was as much time as possible.
It was the whole thing. We're all familiar with it now. But the doctor was one of those guys left over from the Second World War. He was a bit like sort of, kind of one of those Leonard Rossiter series, and he would come in. And he wouldn't be the guy that would deal with any of that fluffy stuff. He would do something like, okay, we're doing male health today. And, okay, chaps, we're going to be talking about testicular cancer. So let's imagine that we've got a sort of, north of the old chap. We've got something, and then heading west, we've got this. Definitely go around south. We'll see. And he kind of was like a Battle of Britain command thing. And he's trying to describe what we should be looking for in the challenges we might be facing, in that department. And so, yeah, the idea that he could move, he struggled with it so much to move into us having...
kind of feel left out that we don't have a Battle of Britain commander doing anything at the
moment.
Oh
my God.
We just have an angry Scottish gentleman.
And then he sort of threw out what we thought were like hand grenades kind of thing, and it was basically male genitalia, which you're supposed to use to be able to see if there's a lump in the in the latex. But it was like, okay, chaps, yeah, hand grenades.
In fairness, that does feel quite forward thinking.
It probably was. It probably was. But were they going? We're going to help you with your mental health and so forth. I mean, I don't know. They probably did. One of the things they did was they did send you off on amazing retreats, and I mean, we had so many extraordinary benefits. It was just ridiculous. Manuel de Cata Cezanne, sort of, team days out and all this kind of stuff. But sometimes it felt like they were trying to get you to leave. They'd do the old thing with a red ribbon. That's your life. Okay, fold it in half because you're here now, and then fold it in half. That's you sleeping, and then fold, and you end up with this little bit like that's the only productive bit you've got left, kind of thing. Well, why are you telling me this?
What's the end point you want from this?
What's the point of this? I don't know. Somebody sold them a course. Somebody thought it was a good idea. They did it. I'm not sure it was.
We've resisted all those those Myers-Briggs personality typings.
We did Myers-Briggs, strength finders, colours. Yeah. We did literally
animals,
everything.
Letters, every form.
I've done everything you could
in the public sector.
Imagine.
It got to the point where someone would walk up to you and go, "Oh, hello, I'm an EIJ. I'm Richard. Nice to meet you." Like,
no, we did all that stuff. But it was great that you could. The key thing was, back to patterns and magic kind of thing. I was able to therefore move around all these departments, learn about all the different behaviors. So, for instance, marketing would all be in one office, and it was typically girls, ladies, and they would all be quite studious, heads down, typing. You'd go into the consulting, typically blokes, and they'd all be at whiteboards doing diagrams. You'd go into the sales area, and that would be typically blokes, and they'd all be standing around talking. And you could sort of see all these patterns of behavior that were kind of, nobody had told them to do it, but they'd sort of found their way into this way of working. And I worked in each of the departments, learned I had to manage people in different ways, had huge budgets, and learned what was effective and what wasn't effective.
Which was your favourite role?
I think it was Ellie's telling me it's marketing, but no, actually I did really love that, but I definitely was out of my comfort zone there. The evangelism was the one I loved the most, the one I started with, and in fact, towards the end, I was thinking I want to go back to doing that again because that was the one I loved the most, and I think I learnt the most from it. And of course, you should never go back because it's never as good as it was, the first time around. But actually, I mean, let's whiz through a bit. But when I got into that role, back to evangelism, and we're talking like 20 years later or something.
Were they surprised that you said, I want to go back to this part of the business?
Yeah. And they weren't really ready for me because I was obviously much more senior, more expensive, all these things. And I kind of landed with a team that were actually a lot of the same people. A lot of the people didn't leave those roles. but I just didn't quite sort of fit with what I now knew. So I was kind of bringing quite a lot of challenge into it, and the manager at the time, it was when we were getting to Microsoft was losing a little bit with the Windows Phone and touchscreen devices, the famous Windows 8 disaster, and it was trying to buy its way back in by going to application developers and almost pay them to put good apps onto all these new app stores and app devices. And it was a numbers game. It was like, go out there, KPIs, get 1,000 apps on the platform, and we'll have been successful, and we'll get paid, and we'll get the red jacket, and all the rest of it. And I was like, no, we need to get the right ones in the right way so that we actually are good for the platform, not whether we get our targets or not. The targets will come, and that was not well received.
Did you ever encounter a good KPI during your career? Because I've never seen a good one.
I was never a great fan.
They're conceptually a lovely idea. Do you want to achieve this really great thing? Yes. What's the consequence of doing that? If you, I always remember being taught, if you put a KPI in a business, 3 things can happen. 2 of them are bad. People cheat the data, or they cheat the system, which gives you weird outcomes, or people do exactly what you want in the way you want, but no one's ever got an example of that.
Yeah. The only one I think was a bank called DBS in Singapore, and I've heard the case study, and I've met the guy that put it in place, and he had that view, and he said, I'm going to just have one, and everything we do, and this was on the sort of tech and customer success side of stuff, was hours saved for customers. That was the measure. Everything had to be, what time does that save the customer, banking and billing and all this rest of it. And I thought that was a good one, because it was good in that it was aspirational. It was the right outcome for the business, but it brought all sorts of things, that you would have been measuring in a, why am I doing this kind of way. So I like that one.
I once got called into, I ran an internal business consultancy for the Environment Agency for a while, and would get lent out to whichever senior director needed some help with some thinking.
Yeah.
So I moved around a lot. And I remember being called into this meeting about the future design of KPI and performance measures. And they'd numbered them, the first draft, 1, 2, 3, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. 11, 12, 13, 21, 22, 23. And I was like, why have you numbered them like that? Oh, so we've got plenty of room to find some other things to measure.
Oh dear God! Yeah,
they were literally like, how can we possibly find more things to measure?
Yeah,
so they'd almost even KPI'd having KPIs.
Yeah. No, it was. That's. I mean, Microsoft, there's a world of the balanced scorecard. The curve. To manage people out, all that kind of stuff. Which all. We were doing them and discrediting them internally, and then seeing them get adopted by the public sector in the UK.
That's why I always hated benchmarking.
Yeah.
So you end up.
Benchmarking.
The public sector would spend a fortune on this. They'd spend 100 grand with a consultancy to go and benchmark themselves against somebody. Then bear in mind that business would have moved on 5 years later, and the public sector would spend 5 years explaining why it wasn't a fair comparison.
Yeah.
Oh, we're not private sector. No, you weren't when you did the benchmarking.
Yeah.
I hate benchmarking.
Yeah. No,
at your own brilliance, not someone else's mediocrity.
Yeah. No. Exactly. So yeah, the sort of that whole world, I got a bit frustrated. And one of the things that was, I suppose, a nice phrase, I suppose, I've managed the relationship between Accenture and Avanade. So Accenture, we know, Avanade was a joint venture between Microsoft and Accenture. So it was a Microsoft consulting firm. It's whatever it is, 50,000 people in its own right now. And it was kind
of a huge number.
Oh yeah, that's just Avanade, and whatever the heck Accenture is. But nobody wanted to manage that alliance between those two, because Accenture was so good, didn't really care about Microsoft. Everybody else wanted Microsoft, right? Accenture didn't really care, and so nobody wanted it because you couldn't hit the KPIs and the targets, and you could end up, So I liked it because it was a challenge. And one of the interesting things I learned there was that you can have influence without power. So in Microsoft, you were constantly climbing up the greasy pole of ideas and power. And if you went, I've got a good idea up your own pyramid, then basically you got shot down either by your manager or, whatever it might be. And similarly was going on at Accenture. Whereas if you managed, the gap between the two pyramids, between the top, which is what I did, So set the agenda, put the board notes sort of in, run the board meeting, then write the notes afterwards. You basically controlled the whole narrative. And afterwards, everybody else down the pyramid would go, what happened? You could slightly distort
You're
it.
the equivalent of the permanent secretary to the cabinet, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I got more done and started to sort of, build
And did
businesses.
you see that gap so you wanted it, or you recognised the gap once you were doing the role?
I think I know. I definitely recognised that I've just described after I did the role. I liked the fact that it was a challenge. I liked to go to things. What happened classically with Microsoft is they'd say, we want you to come and work for us because we want you to be let's say, a creative chef. We want you to forage the lanes and pick the herbs and come in and construct recipes and meals. Actually, what they wanted you to do was flip burgers, at the same speed and velocity as everybody else with the same ingredients, so they knew what they got. So I kept looking for jobs where I could go and forage down, and this was a job to forage because nobody wanted it.
So this is a bit of personal advice I'm looking for here. How did you, by the sounds of it, you still wanted to keep learning and growing and challenging yourself, even as you became more successful, financially in a better spot, family got older. How did you keep that drive and ambition going, or did it tail off?
To a certain extent, it's kind of like the way I played rugby, right? So I didn't run into people. I tried to run around them and go to the gaps, right? Because I was the little small slippery guy. And it was a bit like that. The guys at Microsoft would constantly try and close me down and bash me up into a boring job or, a boring process, or they didn't like me because of the way I operated or something. So kind of I had to keep running and dodging and diving. And so I had to go to something new, either new emerging, new technology, new department, new discipline. So it wasn't really my great innate desire. It was my running away from the boring stuff or the oppressive stuff that made me keep having to learn. That was probably the truth of it.
During this mass period of growth and the building of what we know the tech world to be right now, was the word climate, environment, sustainability, did it ever appear? And if so, when?
Largely, I would say no, but it depends at the sort of the level that you're at. So if you think about it, at the beginning, definitely not. Yeah, weirdly, I was reflecting a little bit. I said, partly why did I get into it? And we haven't spoken about maybe why sort of nature and the environment matters to me, but when I was making some choices, from my limited sort of choices that I had, one of them was, will this have an impact on the environment? So even back in the 80s, it was somewhere in my consciousness and talking to people like Julian. And so, there was clearly there was obviously a narrative, and I had got caught by it, probably the Attenborough generation kind of thing. And so when I chose an industry, I believed that the software industry, was not a polluting industry. That's changed somewhat. But there was a little bit of that narrative there, but largely it was not present until I would say the kind of late 90s, probably early 2000s, and then it was more about customer stories. And so, Microsoft was very good at getting poster children up on stage from all around the world to talk about whatever the issues were in farming, agriculture, manufacturing, and so forth. And so those would quite often relate back to we're very familiar with, videos, human stories, talking about the issues, but obviously how the tech has helped them in some way. So
through a lens of the risks that these
present.
Yeah,
we always look through the lens of what's the issue, what's the value proposition, what's the competency, and then what's the alliance and products that we have to sell. So we had to connect first with the issue of the customer and then make a value proposition which basically said we can address that issue for you before we spoke about the products and the alliances, because we had a history of just doing nothing but product feature. So that was what we were trying to go through. And so we got more and more of those stories across anything you can imagine, but therefore climate and environment were coming in, particularly as it reflected, sectors like, agriculture or whatever it may be. But even in finance, microfinance, I remember, became a very big thing.
Have we pivoted into, you think about the sort of Apple announcements now, they're just big summits that is pure product feature.
Yeah.
It's interesting how that's evolved and come back round.
Yeah, and the innate desire, desire of those companies, it's run by engineers. They are the sort of the people at the center of the business, and they are building product with features and benefits as they design them. And so I used to sort of say, if you want me to sell, imagine we're selling a car here kind of thing, and you want me to talk about spark plugs and the cylinders and the so forth, that matters to you because, and a limited set of people. And of course, it's inherent to what this car is. But most people just want to see an advertisement, driving an open top car through the trees with the wind in their hair kind of thing, because they want to buy a dream. They don't want to buy a feature. And we were constantly fighting with the engineers who wanted to sell the great feature they'd built, because that's what they'd been thinking about.
I think it's increasingly obvious that as we move the environment, natural capital, and everything within that climate and nature box towards a world that needs to attract institutional investment, yelling at the financial world about how terrible the planet is and how much risk we're in is having zero impact whatsoever, as opposed to saying, this is an incredible opportunity that will allow you to buy that car and put the wind through your hair, and it's the next big opportunity not to miss out on. I think that's gathered so much more traction, engagement, conversation than fear has.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a ton of stuff that you can look as research on all of this stuff, and the stuff that Catherine Hayhoe, the chief scientist at Natural Capital, has put out, the stuff that Peter Hyman, the Labour strategist, has put out around how you engage and communicate, and a lot of it that this left wing has done. I think the book Abundance, which is out, is a really good read at the minute as a critique of what the Democrats have done to open the door for all of this stuff. But essentially, yeah, if you just say, look, it's all going to hell in a handcart and you've got to change and it's going to cost you and we know better than you, so take your medicine, that is a very bad way of asking anybody to buy something, if we put it in those crass terms. And so, yeah, you've got to throw a better party. You've got to say, look, there's clean energy, jobs, opportunity to do what you want to do, etc. All of these things have got to be what you're selling, not all of those negatives.
How do we help others in the sector realize that? Because I still think the general prevailing narrative for those people trying to do the right thing for the environment is the fear, it is the negativity, it is they're projecting the angst they feel rather than offering a solution and a better future.
Yeah, and also there's a lot of conflicting, I think, language in out there marketing, because if a crisis is what changes society. If for years we were selling at Microsoft, you could work remotely, you can work in your home office, you can use your office, and all that.
In a day in COVID, right?
COVID, everybody did it, right? All of a sudden, we'd been doing it for 15 years, 20 years, at the company. So a crisis does, but you're missing the point. The crisis is the inflection point for the positive virtues to land, but it was a positive set of virtues that you were selling. It wasn't negatives kind of thing. So how do you, and the other point I think that you see very much in the environment kind of natural capital world is this point of geekism over the thing that you're a specialist in. Absolutely. And so back to my point about I've built the best spark plug in the world, or I'm using the best cam belt or something, who cares?
The amount of green on green attack you get. Oh, that's the wrong type of tree planting. Or that's the wrong specific species we should be. I've started talking about being agnostic to solution.
Yeah.
So we like landscape level restoration where we think about natural capital holistically. That doesn't mean we're anti woodland creation, peatland, blue carbon. Do I think there needs to be a mechanical technological solution? 100% I do.
Yeah.
Am I against rock weathering and biochar? I just don't do them. I'm not against them. We just don't deliver them. So we need all those solutions. Whereas we're too often focused on people defending their specific nuance as opposed to being like.
Well, this was again, if you go again back to Microsoft, so Steve Ballmer was, his DNA was essentially, I think he was something like a I got this wrong probably, but it was a one-car man from his dad worked for a car factory, where it was Ford or something, and you were a one-car man, one brand family, and you stuck with it, and that was it, and then you bought everything Ford kind of thing. And so, take that to Microsoft, and he was doing that. It was Microsoft all the highway, and famously, when the device changes were happening and we're moving from PCs and phones were coming in, people were bringing in iPhones to work because it was better than the thing that Microsoft was offering. Then he would see them in the front audience and he would pick it up and he would grab it out of the hand and stamp on it. Because you're at Microsoft, you use, a Windows phone or whatever it was, right? And then Satya came in and he went, no, we have to have this growth mindset, abundance, and we have to go, if we run our software on everybody's devices, even if we earn less money, we go from whatever, 1 billion to 10 billion devices, we make more money and we have more impact, and we get the virtue that we think we're trying to contribute. And so I think what happens is there comes a point when you with an abundance mindset, you say what we have to do is we have to work at an interoperability layer between all of this stuff, and whether that niche specialism can go on. So there's no point us saying Finn Russell is, we say now he's great and should be, lauded for his speciality, but then criticize somebody else because they're doing a speciality, right? What we've got to do is to provide the framework so that specialities can all come into the team pattern. And then if they fail, they fail. If they succeed, they succeed, But so when I did a whole project with the World Wildlife Fund, more recently, this in the responsible risk era, which was how do we get biodiversity data sort of harmonized in some way. And my whole point, which was just based on technology, was you don't want to harmonize it per se. You want to have novel data coming in from eDNA and from space and God knows what else, because it's just going to keep proliferating. So if you try and standardize it, you're wasting your time. You're going to lose your sort of Finn Russells of the future. So what you need to do is to be able to go to a marketplace at maybe a sort of metadata level. You need to be able to make it commercial and free, but you surface it through a user interface, as you do with your Amazon marketplace. The whole world's bazaar of offerings is there, but there is a harmonization layer, there was a pricing layer, there was a distribution layer, which then makes it available for everyone to pay their money and take their choice. Yes, but you still allow novelty.
Because if you apply the harmonization approach, Amazon would sell a single product.
Yeah.
Which no one wants that.
Yeah, so Microsoft single product then got better because it did diversity. Amazon, total diversity of a marketplace, different model. But then, so we did that with WWF. WWF weren't going to pursue that. So then I brokered a discussion between WWF and TNFD, and we did a press release that WWF and TNFD were going to work on that approach and try and develop that further. It's the only way that we can allow speciality, but then harmonization.
What makes a really good partnership? So you just described there how you didn't get the route through the defensive line that you wanted, so you worked around it.
Yeah.
A nice quick handoff and pass. How do you form great partnerships?
I think that it's an interesting one. It goes back to, I suppose, you've got to understand first of all, the what I said before, the issues, the value proposition, the competencies that each partner has, and then what are your products and what are your values, kind of thing. You've got to understand where the other person stand in their shoes. Quite often with partnerships, so I ran partner managers that looked after Accenture and EDS and all these big partners. You kind of go native, so that's the problem. If you go to the other side of the partnership and you believe too much, then you lose the direction. So you've got to plan, you've got to engage to understand, then you've got to enable both parties to understand each other and be able to operate on each other's. You've got to develop relationships, and then you've got to sustain them. You've got to have patience. And funnily enough, that acronym is PEERS, P-E-E-R-S, plan, engage, enable, relationship, sustain. And I put that into a plan at Microsoft as a joke with a mate, and we said, I wonder if we actually will get that all the way through and everyone will be doing the PEERS plan around the world, which didn't happen, but all of the principles were true.
Love that story. We've kind of hit upon a period of the sector now where people are starting to talk about nature as infrastructure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what I think about this. So, but again, it shows the excitement of people coming in from different directions. So you've got the approach that it feels as if this has come from those people who have worked in financial institutions before. Rob Gardner's guy is doing an amazing job of trying to put natural capital into an existing framework that makes it easier for institutional investors to go, oh, we see where that allocation fits. We can make that easy. Whereas because I do not come from a financial background, I come from an environmental, a data, sport background, I was always excited about the idea of saying, no, this is completely different. This is new. This is disruptive. This is challenging. How do you feel about the sort of association with nature being infrastructure?
Well, I've bought into it, and I'm an advocate of that approach, but for the reason that you sort of alluded to. So I think it's challenging, right? But if you go back to the cliche of that we've all seen of music, when somebody comes along and goes, "Hey, we're a totally new band, we're completely different, we're nothing you've ever heard of," or the movie pitch, it's nothing you've ever seen, nothing, and the people there that are the money people who are thinking, how do I sell, how do I market, how do I distribute this stuff, how do I monetize this, are just going, yeah, I don't know what that is.
Disruptive means risk,
Yeah.
which means don't want to invest in it.
Yeah, don't know how to price it, don't know what I'm going to get out of it, so I don't know what to do with it. And that is absolutely the way people operate. And so then what they start saying, well, I'm a cross between, Rocky and whatever, think of your movie hybrid or music hybrid. Well, we're sort of house music meets grunge, and they just kind of have to you do the hybrid thing. And it's the same in the sort of tech world, so cloud, which now is kind of, we don't even talk about the cloud because it's so pervasive in everything we do, but we spent billions of hours and money and years, as did our competitors, as did all the consultants in the world, to convince people to move from a box of computers on premises to a box of computers that were rented from Microsoft.
Well, after paying them to go the other way previously, or persuading them to go from a big mainframe to a personal computer, and now from your personal computer back to a big one somewhere else.
Yeah, sort of true, but but not that hard to conceive, really, right? Not that, nowhere near as complicated as the world of technology. So, but yet you had to kind of go on these. Well, it's an OPEX CAPEX play. You just had to talk the language of the buyers, basically, about what they were going to put on the balance sheet. It wasn't what at all we thought we were going to start with.
That merging of the the X of Y type analogy.
Yeah.
We had one the other day. Someone ran a piece on us and said the title was Oxygen Conservation is the Blackstone of the environment world.
Yeah.
And I was like, I kind of like that.
Yeah,
I kind of like that if we can achieve the scale and the impact, and we'll do it in a green stone rather
well,
than Blackstone.
if you think about, I think, sort of storytelling, the people say, well, why do the right wing always have the best orators?
This is going to be interesting.
Hitler, Mussolini, you name it. And it's partly because they're selling the past, they're selling nostalgia. And so people have in their mind a vision of what they think the nostalgic past was. You had a vision of the nostalgic, 1980s that you missed out on, right? So you could reflect on it. You've seen stuff. It's the cherry-picked version of what it was, years later. The lived experience was obviously different, as I partly conveyed. But it's easy to sell the past. And
the music was great, though, right?
I prefer the 70s, but there
really?
you go. Well, because I'm a lot older.
Of course.
It's and remember, the music you love is really the music that you, from about a 2-year period when you're 13 to 15 or something, that sticks in your brain most.
Oasis with me for that period.
Yeah, because your brain development, you've got a limited sponge, and it's gone into that sponge, and then it gets saturated with loads more other water kind of thing. But that you're selling nostalgia, you're saying let's go back to that again, and everyone goes, oh yeah, I know what you mean, that's great. And then the sort of the left wing is going, well look, there's a crisis and it's going to be very difficult, as I said before, and you're going to have to trust me, I know better. You're going to have to spend a lot of money and do things in different ways than you've ever done it before. And you're going, I can't get a picture of that in my head. What I'm saying is that people are referencing something that they understand and going, okay, I get that. And if they want that to be a positive or a negative association with
why people grab for regenerative agriculture and forestry as their gateway drugs to natural capital. Because, I understand trees, I understand farming, that'll be my way in.
Yeah.
And
And a lot of so in America, it's Kate Hayhoe, this chief scientist. They've worked with a marketing organization, and they ran ads at the Super Bowl, and they did phenomenal amount of testing, and all of this is available to look at. But it was around how you should be positioning climate, and essentially they say these kind of the messages that resonate. These are the words you should use. These are the sort of syntaxes, and basically we should be talking about pollution. So Schwarzenegger went out the other day and did an interview, and he said we shouldn't be talking about this. We should be just calling it pollution, because people have already got an understanding of pollution. It's already a negative, and so if it's river, sea, air, lung, the child's kindergarten next to the motorway, it's all a negative. You don't have to sell me. Whereas climate change, what is that?
Might be getting better.
Yeah.
Yeah. And especially when, your summers are going to be warmer. Oh, great. I want climate change. This is wonderful.
Exactly. So this is all...
The brilliant marketing director, Octopus Capital, a guy called Henry, he said, and he came to Natural Capital late. So we had a conversation with him a while ago, and he said the stupidest thing they ever did was call it voluntary carbon markets.
Yeah.
So if you'd called it private carbon markets, it'd have flown way, way more now. Voluntary means you don't have to do it.
Yeah.
And because that's the wiring within the psyche that.
Well, but it literally was.
Agreed. But if it had been called private, you can make it luxury and exclusive. It's a private members club. It's not a voluntary members club.
No. So language is crucial, but a lot of this all comes back. I think the more I try and look at how do we actually change people's opinions, and why are we being polarized, and why have we put more information out there and we've actually become more polarized in society? Social media, what social media does is it takes what is already divisions but basically amplifies them, or it takes good things and amplifies them, weapons and tools. But essentially it comes back to a lot of people, the inherent human being is, we have this ego inside us, and maybe it's the battery's low on it, or the battery's high, high ego or low ego. But what we do is we try and find some sort of community to latch onto, whether it's on social media, left wing, right wing. And then from that, we start to be able to form an identity, and we start to, our ego actually goes up because we become a specialist in it. So I'm the spark plug guy that I was talking about before. I've spent my whole life learning about spark plugs. My ego is high on spark plugs. My community of spark plug pals, is big, and therefore I've got an identity. So if you come along and tell me we're not marketing the spark plugs, that's a damage on me personally.
It's what every farmer feels right now.
Yeah.
It's why you get something as ridiculous as no farmers, no food.
Yeah.
Which is the most divisive line that makes no sense. And the amount of farmers I've spoken to one-on-one on that are like, it's not helpful.
Yeah.
That's an NFU thing that we just spoke to ourselves and decided it was a good idea.
Yeah.
Whereas actually it makes no sense, because yes, that's true. If there's no farmers, there would be less food. But also, if there's no climate, if there's no water, if there's no pollinators, if there's no soil, there's no food.
So division is, divide and conquer. It's as old as time. All that social media has done is obviously allow that to be amplified, and the division to be amplified. And when we're trying to message, climate and nature, etc., I suppose the point I'm making is that we've got to be able to give positive communities that people can attach to, which gives them positive ego, positive identity, and that has got to come from examples, because people need examples of patterns that we can add magic to, and those patterns have really got to come from showing people positive examples. And so the reason that I, through what I do now, is say I'm a storyteller, matchmaker and coach, is because I want to tell the stories of oxygen and triodos and rebalanced earth and earth knowledge and climate, credit nature, etc., so that people can see there is positive example. I want to attach myself to that rather than the opposite, which is to spend my whole time showing pictures of burning fields and floods. In my conferences, we don't even do that. If you're in the room, that.
Yeah.
I don't need to remind you every single presentation I do.
One of those things that you get a fact or a piece of information that's so blatantly obvious when it's said to you, you're like, how on earth was that hiding in plain sight? So regulated carbon markets and credits. People would say to me, oh, well, all carbon credits are terrible. It's just people paying to pollute. And because we exclusively work in the voluntary market, I was like, well, of course they're not. They're paying to plant a tree or to restore peatland or to explore blue carbon and plant. But they didn't mean voluntary credits. They meant regulated certificates to pollute, which that is what regulated credits are. They are a tax that doesn't deliver any form of environmental benefit. It's meant to persuade the aviation industries, the heavy industries to pollute less. but they don't have to. They can just pay it.
Yeah.
So a guy gave me an absolute grilling on this once. I went back 18 months later and said, do you know what? I'm really sorry. You were right. I didn't understand your point well enough. So we put this piece out last week going, this week, in fact, sorry. Absolutely. You can pay to pollute, but not in the voluntary market. Because even if you still keep admitting the payment for a nature-based product is delivering positive environmental and hopefully social impact.
Yeah, but look, how confused are we? And, you know, what's the Joe public going to feel?
Not a chance, exactly.
And as soon as they hear, you know, some sort of, you know, good orator, you know, explaining why this is a bad thing.
No farmers, no food. It's easy.
Was it the lie goes around the world in a minute while the truth is trying to get its boots on? You know, this is what, you know, we have to sort of prepare for. So the other thing that I would say that I learned through this sort of Microsoft journey is that biggest marketing machine kind of, you know, in the world, very well connected, brilliantly connected leadership through to execution, even through its channel, and you know, we would spend billions, you know, resources you will never have in the natural capital world to convince people to do a change from on-premise to the cloud. And so what you would find is all of this stuff, this FUD, you know, fear, uncertainty and doubt being created by the incumbency who didn't want it to happen because they weren't quite ready yet or whatever it might be. And so, you know, you would get a success story and you would say, my world was banking. So we'd say there's a retail bank that's now using the cloud, right? They'll talk to you, they'll show you the case study, they'll give you the KPIs, they'll give you the evidence. Then somebody would say, well, that's great, but I'm not a retail bank, I'm a commercial bank. So you'd get a commercial bank, then you'd get a, you know, correspondent bank. And you just have to keep on doing it until the momentum shifts. And then you have innovators, you know, curve, your innovators, your early adopters, your laggards and so forth. And you just don't kind of bother with the laggards until they're actually so broken, you can go around timing and say, okay, do you want to join the party now? No criticism, but, you know.
So what's the great and the good in the sector that we've talked about? I'll be listening to this. So what would you advise us that are running so it's coaching opportunity here, the ones of us that are running the natural capital businesses, what should we be doing to help accelerate that process if you even can? You know, how do we land that change as quickly and as well as possible?
I think learn from the communication side to a certain extent. So there is, you know, there's always going to be people that are reticent and against, but don't turn them against you. You know, and I know you've got to, you know, there's a difference between the communication and there's a difference between the operational change process. And but I think use that language of, yeah, you know, it's not we know better and you will get our way in the end and all that stuff. So we've got to, everybody needs to be as embracing as possible to allow everybody to drop their ego, join a new community, form a new identity. And that then...
Were there groups that you just think we're never going to reach? So we
of
have,
course.
And you just didn't put any more resources into those?
You sort of go, well, what we would do is we would target the ones that had the highest propensity to do what we wanted to do. So we would definitely go for them and put most resources on them.
Yeah.
And there would be ones that were absolutely anti. You know, you knew they had a 20-year contract with some competitor or something. You know, just don't bother. But actually, it was about timing because typically, I would always say the sort of the third in class in the sector was really the best one to deal with because they're not the first and they're not the second. So the first knows they're the best, the second thinks they're going to be the best, the third knows they've got to do something completely different. So it was kind of like, you know, I'd say that by a member of a class, if you like, you know, class is the wrong word, but a group in the sector. But actually, you can look at that at all sorts of different levels. So somebody where it's broken and they're not doing well is open to change. So target the ones that have got the highest propensity to change, target the ones that are most broken, create momentum, and then from momentum, you'll find that other people who were anti you will join in. But it's more about being positive than focusing on them as being, well, you're all laggards, you're all dinosaurs because you're not using Microsoft Office. You know, but nobody ever did that.
We're seeing some really exciting stuff come out of NatWest Cushion at the moment.
Yeah.
About how they're positioning natural capital and how they're working in that sort of government agenda of freeing up more pension fund money for developmental investment in the UK. So we went to an event that they hosted with Eversheds about fiduciary responsibility and how that can be broadened to account for the future and allow different investment in like healthcare and natural capital and things. How do you think we can better communicate with the pension fund world and make natural capital and the environment more accessible and exciting for them?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. We're getting the pension industry involved in Sustainable Finance Live, our conference this year, which is on resilient infrastructure. And so I spoke to one of the trustees of one of the biggest pension funds in the UK. And he said to me, look, we have in our, as a trustee, we have a desire to be involved in, natural capital, the environment and social causes and so on and so forth. But we have, obviously a risk function, which means that we've got to pay out, to our pensioners what they expect. And if you look at the defined benefit schemes, they're kind of coming to the end of their life now, which is the point of least risk. So they've got to sort of, crystallize the value of the fund and so that it gets paid out. So they're not going to be going into risky things. The defined contribution industry, which is the one most of us have grown up in, people probably younger than me, is very liquid, right? So you can look at the price of your pension, you can see the value of it, and you can switch in and out very quickly. So therefore, they can't be sort of egalitarian. Some can, but the majority can't. They've just got to show a fiduciary duty to deliver to the to their beneficiaries. So it's all down to the risk function. So what he said was that we then work with the investment consultants, and this is the likes of sort of Mercer and I think Reddington, where Rob came from. And what they're doing is they would write the brief, if you like, for the RFP to go out to the investment managers, and the investment managers pitch for it to say, right, we will take your risk function, your goals that you have, the things that you want to invest in and not invest in, and then we'll write a mandate, and then obviously people will pitch for that mandate. You talk to the investment manager, the manager then says, well, yeah, but I've just got to do short-term KPI operation because I've only got this deal for, a 10-year loop or whatever, and I've got to deliver. And then you talk to the investment consultant, and you say, well, why didn't you write all the rules and regulations into the RFP so that everything is done? And they go, well, we can't really do that. We've got to be neutral. So you say, well, who is going to be responsible in this whole cycle for saying, I am going to manage and monitor the risk that is embedded within that pension? And they said, well, that's the corporate. And then you go to the corporate, and the corporate says, yeah, well, I'm doing that if I know that I'm reliant upon nature in my business, again, as per Rob Gardner with Purina business, $10 billion business, whatever that is, 5 billion or something in Europe, but entirely dependent upon fish stocks in the North Sea. That corporate then is the one that at the end of the day has got to look into their business, see their dependency on nature, figure out, whether it's sustainable, and then put in case the mitigations to address that. So everyone looks at the pension industry and goes, pension industry will fix that because they've got money, but they will just push down the responsibility for what actually happens to natural capital to the corporate steward of that. And yes, there can be rules and mandates put in place along the way, but a lot of dilution happens through that chain of command.
Such an exciting time. I think that it is the time to start aligning the language in that way, and it's something. I've had a little playful description of the way we work, depending on the lens people look at it. Either we're doing something completely novel and innovative in terms of the world of natural capital that's well backed by a real asset that's land, or we have a very traditional, well understood business model that is a real estate trust with a significantly exciting upside that can come from natural capital. Depending on which way you look at that, both those things are true of the same business model.
And this brings us all back to sort of patterns of magic and then inflection points. So if you go back to the 2008 financial crisis, so by which time, in my career, I'd gone back to evangelism, and I was pushing the apps on Windows and realizing it was going nowhere because we were selling a donkey. And so, when you spoke to the customers, what you realized was what was happening in the financial crisis, right? So you had companies going bust, experienced people leaving in droves because they were hating their jobs, wanting to get out. There was the cloud was emerging as a technology, mobile phone in the centrality of communication device. You were getting all of the ability to build apps and web services much faster. And you go, well, what are all those things? What's all that got to do with each other? But you essentially had a sort of a skilled workforce that wanted something different. You had a world that wanted something different. You had a regulatory regime saying banks too big to fail, therefore we need open data and we need open banking. And then you had shared workspaces so people could leave, and for a low price rent, they could team up with a young computer scientist who was building an app who could access the cloud, so they didn't have to buy all these computers. So suddenly there was this emergence of skill and capability and potential, which created, the likes of the Monzos and the Revoluts and the Clearbanks and all the rest of it. So you got the change in the world you were looking for. Now, at the time, you may not have realized that convergence, that inflection point at the time of a crisis was going to get you what you wanted. And some people would say open banking still hasn't delivered. But I would argue, our lives in terms of, payments and banking is far better than it was in 2008 at the customer service layer. And so that's what we need to get to in this sort of world of natural capital, is that we need to sort of see the crisis that's going on. And I think people are genuinely seeing the crisis, but maybe not everyone. Recognize it in a regulatory and policy push which is coming through, but maybe it's coming through things like the infrastructure and the work that's going on through government at the moment with the UK growth plan and the industrial policy, which is, build resilient infrastructure, but have nature as infrastructure in there as well. So you're attaching to the thematic of the day and the thinking of the day. That's the pattern. Then the magic is the convergence of the things like you're doing, and there suddenly you get the accretion and the acceleration. If you look back in 10 years, you will kind of be, hopefully way more impactful than a Revolut was, but Revolut today is way better than those three guys sitting around a desk 10 years ago, right? But it's a whole coalescence of things.
Renaissance of natural capital. How is AI going to impact all this, Richard?
As ever, weapons and tools, but I think if we focus on the positive, the thing I'm really excited about is its democratization. So again, if you go back to my ancient history in technology, when I rocked up at Computer Associates and I was a sales guy going out to do a pitch, we would be given a carousel of 35mm slides, and that would be our pitch deck. And we would just move, slides around. And if we said we want a new slide created, it cost us £50 a slide, and we had to wait a week for it. Along comes a PowerPoint, and suddenly, we can all do what we want with it, and it's much more immediate. On the other hand, we weren't designers, and we created horrible typography, and it was a total mess. So you can get a democratization, makes it more accessible. You can do bad things with it, but you can also do good. If we do, that's a trivial example, but this is, if we take, for example, I met a company the other day, what they were doing is they're taking Earth observation data, geospatial data, linking it with assets and the value of those assets, and that is a complex set of data to actually wrangle down into whatever a particular use case is. And they're using AI to actually turn that into large language. So they're making it into text, large language models, and then using agentic AI so that somebody can basically use a bot to interpret that, and then link it with other agents so that they get the chain of the process that they're trying to do executed very rapidly. So I think the financial services industry, I've seen it look at things like space data mapping and all the rest of it and go, well, we can't do that for a portfolio. We can't zoom in on maps and everything else for, all these companies like Reckitt and Uni and everyone else. We can't possibly do it. But if I could interpret it and say, biodiversity hotspots, 30 by 30, where do those rules apply? What are the jurisdictions? What does that affect my supply chains? What is central to the financial plan that I'm working on at the moment, and give me that as a report in this format in 5 minutes. Suddenly, you're going to get much better interpretation of data and understanding.
You absolutely are. You mentioned it earlier, but talk to us about the conference this year. What have you got planned, and when is it?
Yep, so thanks a lot. We're doing it November the 4th in London, as same place we always do it, at the Royal College of Pathologists, which is
such a cool venue.
Such a good venue, Such a good venue. Sounds like it's going to be macabre, but it's not. And we're focused on resilient infrastructure for the reason I said. I mean, I think that, climate it's not literally true, but I think back to storytelling, climate is global, nature is local. And then you have to apply nature locally to where the money is. The money at the moment will be through the UK growth plan. That's focusing on infrastructure, road, rail, data centres, energy. All of those things are intersecting with nature. So we're embedding how do you get the money to pay for that infrastructure? What are you going to do with that infrastructure as it pertains to nature? And obviously the government needs to deliver. It's worried about its political mandate and the length of time it has. And typically infrastructure is a long-term play. So they need to show delivery. Our fear is that they will throw the baby out with the bathwater, the baby being nature, because, the rhetoric is who wants another bat tunnel, fiasco. So we're looking at the planning process, and the planning process is, with all its consultations and judicial reviews, takes too long to get stuff done. So they're going to want to truncate that.
My favourite anecdote on the planning system that I heard the other day. Are you familiar with the Sphere in Las Vegas? It's a big
I am.
sphere-shaped video dome that's on the outside and the inside. So massive hot ticket sporting venue to see incredible events over there and concerts and things. They were put in for planning permission at the exact same time in London and Las Vegas. They haven't made the decision on London. The one in Vegas has been operational for 2 years.
Yeah, and that planning process, therefore, is the pinch point of a process we're going to focus at. We want to, everything I've spoken about here, we want to be able to say, don't reduce, which is the natural way of doing things. We need to be able to pump in geospatial data. We need to be able to use AI. We need to be able to bring in eDNA, all these different things at one end. But on the other end, we know there's a skills problem. We know that there's a legacy tech problem, a legacy process problem. All of this compounds the delivery of decision making. So we need to be able to go back to what I said before, create a kind of metadata level above all of this legacy. We need to be able to make that in something we can interrogate using AI, for example. We need to be able to change some gating processes, less judicial reviews and so forth, so that we get a quicker outcome but also a better outcome, whereas I think the focus may be just on a quicker outcome. So the conference will be, how do we get the money? How do we focus on the planning process, but how do we protect nature? And what other techniques are there to crowd money into this area, such as different types of accounting treatments, etc. So we'll be doing that, and then the hackathon will give people, hopefully, the cloud platform to be able to develop some of these techniques, and we can then create a few pop stars or rock stars of the future.
Love it. And what about you personally? What's next on your list of goals, ambitions, adventures?
One of the things I didn't really say was that the reason I got into all this stuff was that my wife used to work for a safari company back in when in her 20s. So we had the luxury of going places we couldn't afford to go because we got perks on our job. So I was looking in the eye of a whale, or with a BBC crew, and the only other people, seeing the turtles on the beach, and going off to Africa, or looking at proboscis monkeys in Borneo, etc. when I was in my 20s, which was where I got this love for this stuff from, and I'm just now applying the love to the stuff I've learned through a career of finance and technology. So what I hope to do is go back and do a few more of those trips now the kids have grown up.
Love it. You've been so generous with your time and taken me down some incredible nostalgic memory lanes. Is there one question I haven't asked you wish I had?
No, I can't think there's anything that's missing. We've covered a lot of territory.
Well, I had about another 30, so we'll have to get you back for a part 2. But it's been an absolute pleasure, mate. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's been a, as you say, a walk down memory lane.